Hey, Soil Nation, thanks for tuning back in this week. We have a special week lined up for you. We are going to be doing our first of our farmer portfolios, farmer highlight series, in which we're going to be discussing cover crops and soil health with local farmers in an attempt to bring some new ideas and fresh ideas and just expose you guys to some things that guys are doing around here to try and better their operation. So over the next 2 days, we'll have a two-part series where we're going to be discussing interseeding cover crops with the local Washington farmer, Michael Vittetoe. You can look him up on Twitter at Vittetoe761, and you can also find his blog spot at thecubiclefarmrefugee.blogspot.com. This is episode 12 of the Topsoil Podcast.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Topsoil Podcast. This is our first really actual guest show. Michael Vittetoe is here, local farmer. We've talked about him a lot already on using cover crops, interseeding cover crops, trying to create diversity in his operation. And so kind of long-standing family operation in the area, but Michael's back helping out his dad and granddad and bringing some new ideas and stuff. So we're going to get on to that with Michael. I'm Mitchell Hora with Continuum Ag, joined again with Trent Stout, and we're going to see where this goes and get you guys' feedback. We'll link up, Michael's contact info as well, and I'm sure he'd take more questions here after.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So this is our first farmer profile. So we're going to kind of see how this goes.
Yeah.
Bringing in the big guns.
Bringing in the big guns. So Michael is a intercropper here in Washington County. He's also doing quite a bit of speaking around just at local county water conservation districts and so forth. So you can find him on Twitter at Vittetoe761.
That's correct.
You can also find him on Facebook and
new Twitter as well.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it does have a new Twitter. We'll get into that a little bit later.
Yeah, we will.
But Michael has an interesting story. He also does a blog, and we've linked that blog up on our Facebook page, so make sure you check that out. It is at
Cubicle Farm Refugee.
Cubiclefarmerrefugee.blogspot.com. So you can follow his story there as well. Yep. Like I said, you can find that on Facebook. So why don't we just go back clear to the beginning of Michael Vittetoe? Yeah. And just kind of tell us a little bit about, how you got to where
the origin story.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I guess a little background on our operation. My dad and I and my grandpa, we farm about 1,400 acres here in Washington County, corn and soybeans, and then we also have hogs in confinement operation that we contract grow. So we've got, the crop and the livestock going right now, but it's more of a traditional cropping system, conventional cropping system. We're using no-till and cover crops, but, it's not full on, when you hear Mitchell and Trent talk about regenerative ag, we're not there yet, but we're making progress on getting it to that point. So anyways, to kind of go back and tell my story, growing up, we had a farrow to finish hog operation on the farm, and so when I was a kid, growing up on the weekends that it was our turn to do the chores, I was out in the farrowing houses, helping the sows when they were pigging and cleaning up stalls and all kinds of stuff like that, and so I got a good taste of what livestock farming was like as a kid. And to be honest with you, I wasn't a real big fan of it. It gets to be long days out there, and it's not exactly what you want to be doing as a 8 or 9 year old kid on a Saturday. Go hang out in the farrowing house. But it was a good experience, but it kind of made me not really want to be around the farm. So for better or for worse, that's the way it happened. And so once I got out of high school, I actually went to college at the University of Iowa for civil engineering, and got a job after I graduated that in Muscatine, which is just east of here, about 40 minutes, which Trent has some roots over there as well. So I worked as an engineer for 5 years until 2014, and in the fall of 2014 I came back to the farm operation full time, and I've been back on the farm ever since. So, coming back in 2014, I would have been 27 years old or something like that at that point, and I had virtually no farm experience for all intents and purposes other than just the stuff growing up, because obviously, when I was working as an engineer and going to school, I wasn't really around the farm all that much, just coming back on the weekends, but not really even helping, just kind of hanging out. So I was essentially a blank sheet of paper on, what I had to learn and kind of my background. So once I came back, I was all in. I need to learn all about everything and figure out what this farming thing's all about, So I was like a dry sponge, soaking everything up, going to every meeting I could go to and whatnot, and a lot of that stuff consisted of stuff that was being put on by the seed companies and chemical companies and all that stuff. So, I was full on drinking the conventional, quote unquote conventional farm Kool-Aid at that point. And, it wasn't until, when was it? The end of 2015 when you had your first meetings in there at Pizza Ranch in Washington, and you called me and called my dad and I and wanted us to go in, and I actually was able to make it, and those meetings were kind of the thing that sparked my interest in soil health and everything that has come from that. I didn't really know anything about it, so I went home from that meeting and just started putting the Google to work. Like what can I find here?
YouTube University.
Yeah, exactly.
So so there's probably people listening that are kind of in the same situation that you were in, right?
Yeah.
They kind of stumble upon maybe this episode. What did you see to be the most fundamental, jumping start? Where would you tell them to start at and start consuming maybe some content? So
the thing that really got me started was I found one of Gabe Brown's talks on YouTube, and one where he's talking about and laying out the 5 principles of soil health, and that's a really good one. That was the stepping stone that I took, and I remember the day I was sitting there listening to it, and it was just like, man, my head was all over the room, because it was just, my head exploded listening to that. It just flew in the face of everything I'd been hearing for the last year, just from everything that everybody was talking about. It was completely different, and so it was really interesting, and I liked what I was hearing, so it got me to the point where I'm like, I need to keep doing more research on this stuff. And so from there, I stumbled upon, Dave Brandt, Ray Archuleta, Rick Haney, and some of their talks and whatnot, and it was just downward spiral from there, I guess you could say. Once you get into it to that point and start learning some of the stuff that those guys are talking about, there's no turning back. Yeah. At least for me, anyways. You can't unlearn that stuff, right. And go back to the other way and just be all in.
So with that, then, as you were starting to learn, how does that then align with what was going on the farm? So you guys have been no-till for a long time, but young guy now coming back to help out dad and grandpa.
Yep.
And you were saying, hey, we got all this really cool stuff. Look at this. Yep. I know you guys didn't. It definitely wasn't, hey, let's put everything into cover crops and let's do this diversity deal.
Right. And we're still not at that point.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And still learning along the way. So for people watching this or listening, that we are right in the middle of trying to learn about this and still have a long way to go. So maybe hitting on that a little bit on how that all went about.
Yeah, so like what he's talking about, it's a transition, and we farm 1,400 acres and we've got cover crops on about 400 of them right now, and I'm a pretty staunch supporter of cover crops, but we're also trying to not go in and get over our head and kind of bite off more than what we can chew at the same time. So I guess, what was your question, Mitchell, again?
Just kind of like maybe that transition back to with Grandpa.
Yeah.
Maybe just
okay.
as you started, what was that first aha moment that you had?
Yeah. So when I was learning or watching all these videos and kind of first getting my feet wet, at that same time, we also had drilled cereal rye on a field really close to my house, essentially in my backyard, for the first time. Mm-hmm. It's some hills on that field and whatnot, and we drilled it into bean stubble. And so it was in a spot where I was really able to keep an eye on it and see what was going on, see the changes, and just observe how that cover crop transformed that soil. And that was a long-term no-till field, but it was his first time having a cover crop on it. Mm-hmm. And so that was really helpful, to be able to go watch that and whatnot. But at the same time, all we had out there was cereal rye, And so I knew from listening to all these guys talk that we needed to get more diversity into the operation and into these cover crops in order to really maximize the gains on it, instead of just having monoculture cover crops and monoculture catch crops. So that was
So talk a little bit, just back up there real quick, when you're talking about these, you need to get more species to maximize the gains. Mm-hmm. What's your thought process in that, and what kind of gains, because it all starts with your goal. Mm-hmm. So what were your goals, and what are you talking, talk to people about maximizing gains?
So with the diversity on the cover crops and everything, you have to understand that plants are essentially the fundamental basis for your soil biology.
Well, they're the mouth of the soil or something that they like.
Yeah, I mean they're the food source and the energy source for your soil biology. Yeah. And just like you and I, some biological species may prefer certain types of food, and other ones would prefer others, and those different types of plants are those different types of food. Mm-hmm. So, when all the food that our biology has seen for the last however many decades is corn and soybeans, trying to get more food sources and other types of food sources out there is going to result in different types of biology essentially waking up and starting to function again. So rye is a good one because that gets another, it's going to feed different.
Yeah. So now you have the corn microbes and the bean microbes. Now you at least have the
rye microbes. But there's so much more out there than that. You look at the native prairie and there's just crazy amounts of diversity out there. So that's
maybe
kind of the premise.
Hit on that more too, that, okay, the microbes, we can kind of see that we're getting more and doing a lot of testing and stuff. So we are quantifying that. We're seeing things change. But what about some of the visual things you've seen too, with going all the way up to insects and that kind of stuff that we can see, and pollinators and all that? Like
anytime you've got a diverse plant species mix out there, you're going to be supporting different insects, and you'll see, like with our interseeding fields, it was crazy the amount of insects that we had out there, and what they weren't damaging the crop, at least as far as I could tell. They were feeding off of the cover crop species that we had interseeded out there. So just providing that diversity is going to support different insects as well as the biology. But it helps with soil structure and everything else. Feeding the earthworms. The earthworms, I'm sure they get tired of eating soybeans and corn stubble or corn stover and whatnot as well. So
they want more.
So that helps them as well. They'll move in faster, and it helps break up compaction and whatnot as well.
So maybe kind of explain for those who don't know, like, what is interseeding and how are you doing that? Like maybe set up and like how that all kind of works together.
So that ties back to that same winter there or fall and spring and whatnot in 2015. I was doing all this research on the cover crops, and the diversity was a key factor in it all. And so I was trying to figure out, okay, how can we get diversity back in our system? And everybody, standard answer is you got to add a third crop, a small grain crop and whatnot, and then go in with a diverse mix after that. Well, that's gonna be a pretty tough sell around here. There's just not that great of markets yet for small grains and whatnot, and so I kind of, instead of bashing my head against the wall trying to make that work, I started just doing more research and whatnot, and that was when I kind of found Lauren Steinloggy up in West Union, Iowa, Northeast Iowa, and he has some good posts on Ag Talk from way back when, in the early 2010s, when he was very first experimenting on this stuff and learning as he was going, and he was getting to be pretty experienced by 2015. So he was a good resource for that stuff with interseeding. Interseeding covers into corn is one route that we can take to get that diversity into our mix. And so by interseeding, what I'm talking about is not coming in with a high boy at tassel time or whatnot, or black layer. We're talking about going out anytime up to probably V6, I would say. V6 would be the very upper limit, the latest that you could get in there and reasonably be expecting anything to make it. In this area anyways. Other areas are going to be different, but that's been my experience. So in 2015, that winter 2015 to 2016 was when I discovered this stuff, and that was when I kind of decided, hey, let's try and see what we can do on this. And so I came out here and talked to Trent and told him what I wanted to do, and he kicked me out and told me I was crazy. No, I'm just kidding. He didn't do that, but we talked it over and kind of made a plan, and we were able to get in there and do some interseeding in 2016 and see how it worked. But that we were on the back end of that window in 2016, and a lot of stuff got shaded out by the corn, and starting just
so there wasn't a whole lot that grew your first year. It was a little bit late. There was a little bit of stuff that
so everything grew to start with. Everything was able to get established and
what
get
kind of stuff did you plant?
Talk about that mix a little bit.
So to back up a little bit, we had
2016 mix planted into corn at like V6.
It was
V4, V5,
V5 probably.
Yeah,
V6. It was kind of in that stage.
We had two different fields. One was not as far along as the other.
Yeah.
Trent was out there with us in one of them, and that was definitely.
It was pretty far along.
It was pretty far along. It was about. It was all of V5 getting to V6.
And why that matters is because most of you know this, but why that matters is because at V6 in the growth stage of the corn plant, the growing point is emerged out of the ground. If you would run over that stalk at V6 and you break that stalk off below the growing point, it will not recover. So you're going to lose that stand. So it's kind of important to understand where the staging of that plant is when you're going in early, because you want to do it when that growing point is still protected from the ground. So
and the later that you get, the closer to rapid growth stage the corn is going to be, and the shorter your period for establishment is going to be.
Yeah.
So
what were those crops in, to back up again?
Yeah. So our mix on the interseeding in 2016, we had three different types of clover: red clover, crimson clover, and Balanza clover. And then we had hairy vetch, and then we had annual ryegrass. And that was one of the mixes for one field. And then another field, we pulled the hairy vetch out, still had the three clovers and the annual rye, but then we added radishes, daikon radishes, and rapeseed. And so everything got established and got through our residual herbicide, which was just a half rate of atrazine and acetochlor. We were able to get things going, and things were looking decent there in like mid-July or early July, but then come late July, things were pretty well disappearing just from the corn canopy being so dense and just the shade getting really tough on the stuff. And so part of the reason for that was during the month of June, right after we planted the covers, we planted them on June 3rd, and essentially right after that, it got really hot and no rain until the end of the month. June 30th was the next time we got a rain. So they were pretty well stressed as young seedlings and not really able to get established like they would if we would have gotten, even just one rain and maybe not had 90 plus degree temps almost every day throughout the whole month. It was hot. So that was a factor in it, but they were maybe the size of a pop can, beer can.
Radishes going.
But the clovers and everything too, that's about how tall they were. Maybe a little bit shorter in places. Come mid-July, and then at that point, once the corn canopy closed up, everything except the brassicas died off and was nowhere to be found come harvest time and whatnot. But the radishes and the rapeseed, they were somehow able to make it, and I think that has to do with the taproot root structure that they have. They were able to punch down and get to some moisture, whereas some of the slower growing stuff, the clovers and whatnot, they weren't quite able to get down into that as quick. So
yeah.
So the concept is, in a very basic sense, that you put that out there so that when you go and harvest that crop, it kind of goes dormant, right?
Yep.
And then as you go and harvest that crop, it's there in the fall.
Yeah,
right?
I think
and it's already kind of got this head start.
I think the easiest way to put it is the goal for interseeding is to get the plants established enough that they can go dormant and live off of their root systems while the corn has shaded them out, instead of having to get the sunlight and do photosynthesis and whatnot. So they kind of get set back into survival mode while that corn canopy's closed up, and then once the corn starts to dry down and harvest comes along, they've got full sunlight and they're already established with that root system that they're living off of, and they've got a head start on anything that would have been drilled after harvest.
So let's tackle the big, elephant in the room for guys that are listening that are skeptics of interseeding. The number one thing that we hear is this is going to compete with your corn crop.
Right.
Why would you go out there and plant weeds?
Yeah.
Okay,
Well,
so what do you say to those guys?
I guess the best way to put it is, that can happen, but you have to try pretty hard for that to happen, and that's kind of what we ended up doing in 2017.
2017 story.
But in 16, we had zero yield hit on any of our interseeded stuff. If anything, we had a yield bump, but it was only a couple bushel. Not really enough to say, oh, it's because of the interseeding. It could have just been, a little bit of variability in the soils or what have you. But yeah, in that situation we had no yield hit, and I think that's going to be the case for essentially everyone out there that's going to try this stuff, unless they want to get really risky and go in pre-emerge, which is what we did in 2017. And I think even that can be managed to be done without a yield hit if you do it properly.
Sure.
So,
and you can look at these photos, right, of the whole first experience.
Yep.
And not only that, I'm sure there's guys out there who have questions on the equipment.
Oh, yeah.
To do this.
Yep.
For sure.
And so you can see Michael's setup. You can see the progression of these plants all the way through that at your blog. Right?
Yep, the blog has a 2016 interseeding post on it with a whole bunch of pictures and a caption on every picture to kind of explain what's going on. And I need to get one up for 2017, but I just haven't gotten around to doing it yet. I've kind of gotten lazy on the blog, so I need to get that going again. But yeah, we've got other stuff on there as well. On the blog as far as other things that we have going on. So there's plenty of content on that if you're wanting to go snoop
or even
around.
your Twitter.
Well, yeah,
Or the Twitter. The Twitter's more of
content.
a live feed of what's going on at any given point in time. So yeah, to move into the competition thing, I think that's a good time to transition into 2017. So we're just doing this on a small acreage. We're not doing this on all of our corn by any means. So, after we had problems with getting the covers in too late and not getting them established enough in 16, instead of just bumping that back a little bit, I decided let's bump it back a lot and let's find the limit on how early we can put this in there and just see what happens. And so what we ended up doing is going in with the interseeded covers pre-emerge before the corn was out of the ground, and just seeing how it would go from there. And we had a more diverse mix. We had 11 species in there. Kept the clovers. I think we had 4 different types of clovers. The same ones. I think we had
some peas.
And I'm trying to think of the clovers. We added sweet clover.
Berseem.
No, we didn't have berseem.
Oh, that's right. Yellow sweet clover.
Balanza, yellow sweet, and crimson. And I'm trying to think if we had red. I don't know if we had red or not. But
well, I think because you had some left over.
Either way, we had some clovers in there, and then we had annual ryegrass again, and we threw in oats. This year was a new one. We also used cowpeas. Was a warm season legume that we used. And then we had flax, phacelia, and then radishes and mustard. So we had pretty much the full gamut out there, and things were looking really good early. But when you go in there pre-emerge, there's a lot of time between when you put those covers in to when that corn is going to cover up the rows on the cover crops. And so that became a problem for us with the brassicas that we had in the mix, the radish and the mustard, because they had so much time with full sunlight that they didn't realize that they were planted in a cornfield. They had no idea that was going on, essentially. And so come mid-June, they were pretty far along. They had full sunlight yet, and they went ahead and bolted and started putting seed heads on. And that was the biggest issue with interseeding in 2017 for us. Those plants going reproductive was a big draw on water and nutrients in my mind, and we weren't exactly on an excess of water this year either.
No.
We had just enough that we were able to get by at the right times and had really good yields, but we didn't have too much by any stretch of the imagination. So that was a big issue for us, and that was a good learning experience while we're still doing this on small acreage on what to do and what not to do in various situations.
And so radishes are one of those crops or cover crops that everybody kind of would like to have. Mm-hmm. They've done a really good job of marketing daikon radishes. Yep. So everybody feels like they want radishes, but we have this obstacle of when we can get them in. Yep. If you're in a corn soy rotation. Yep. So you would think, okay, if I'm going to make the jump to interseeding, radishes, that's perfect because now I can get them in early. But the problem is a radish planted before the summer solstice is different than a radish planted after, right? And so talk a little bit maybe about these differences and what to be careful of.
And I think if you're going in and interseeding anytime after V2, V3, somewhere in that ballpark where the corn's at least out of the ground and we'll have a decent jump start on this stuff, it's not going to be a problem. But the brassicas are something that you definitely don't want to use unless you're in the back half of that interseeding window.
That's a good point.
In my mind anyways. That's, I'm not going to put them out there if I'm going in anytime before probably V3 ever again. That was...
because they just competed really. Yeah,
they
got big leaves.
Well,
they think they need to go to seed.
If you can get them covered up with the corn canopy before they bolt, they'll be awesome. Because that's what we had happen in 2016. They made it and they were able to survive underneath the canopy. And then once that canopy opened up, we had some radishes out there that were 2 inches in diameter. That was about exactly what you want out of those radishes. So it's just something that gets to be pretty intricate from a management standpoint, and it's really something that you have to just go experiment on your own farm and in your own area, because any other place essentially other than right here in Washington County is going to behave quite a bit different than what our stuff is behaving. So that's the biggest thing in my mind is, you got to go out and learn how this stuff behaves on your own and know kind of what to expect and whatnot before you really start going and putting it on broad acres.
Hey Soil Nation, thanks for joining us for part 1 of our 2-part series talking with Washington County farmer Michael Vittetoe about intercropping and cover crops in his operation. Please join us again tomorrow. We'll talk more in depth surrounding Michael's chemical program, as well as specific species that Michael's using, as well as some rules of thumb that he has if you are looking at intercropping in your system. Again, look him up on Twitter at Vittetoe761, as well as on his blog, thecubiclefarmrefugee.blogspot.com. Thank you so much for tuning in. We look forward to talking with you tomorrow. Again, leave us some feedback on Facebook at the Topsoil Podcast page, or find us on Twitter, and we'd love to hear from you guys.